My guest now is Main Street columnist Bill McGurn, who has been taking a look at the idea that President Obama says he's going to run against Congress. And the question is just which part of Congress will the president be running against? And Bill has his own thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I think the president hasn't made it clear. He says the do-nothing Congress, out of Harry Truman's playbook. When Harry Truman was running, it was against the Republican Party that controlled both houses. Half this Congress is run by President Obama's own party. So they can't be too happy about that. People may not discriminate between the two.
Well, you're suggesting that maybe some of these Republican candidates, including those that are running for president, ought to learn two new words: Harry Reid.
Exactly.
Used to be Nancy Pelosi,
that's
now
right.
It's Harry Reid.
Well, especially if you want do nothing. I mean, look, apart from his initial role in Obamacare, which was to move discussions behind closed doors, to have things like the Louisiana Purchase and Cornhusker kickback to buy votes and so forth, most of Mr. Reid's leadership now is to prevent the buck from getting to Mr. Obama's desk rather than the other way around. And Republicans need to highlight that. If Obama wants to talk about the do-nothing Congress, they ought to talk about the do-nothing Senate.
Well, Steve Barr and I were just talking about the president's budget, and I believe, as you're pointing out, the idea of a budget and Harry Reid really haven't connected for a very long time.
No, he's ignored it for the last 3 years. I think he says
we haven't had one for 3 years.
Right, and I think he said we're not going to have one this year. So in terms of do nothing, look, last year when President Obama had his jobs bill and he said, pass this bill now, it was Harry Reid that blocked the vote by changing the Senate rules on the Republicans for this. The Republicans wanted a vote. He didn't.
I want to ask you one other political question, Bill, and that is, a lot of Republican conservatives now, including Mitt Romney, claim they too are running against Congress in Washington. And in this, they include the Republicans in Congress, who they describe as the Republican establishment. I mean, to what extent is that an accurate description of what has been going on between the Republicans and Democrats in Congress the last year or so?
Well, I think it depends on who you're talking about. I think in the House, the Republicans have done a pretty good job. They control one half of one branch of government, and they've used it to block the worst things of the Obama agenda. They can't get through what they want because they don't control the other part. So I think it's a little unfair with the House Republicans. They can only go so far. That's why I think a Republican candidate needs to focus on Harry Reid and say, what's the real obstruction here? The real obstruction is the Senate, preventing these things from even being voted on. The Republicans have done a good job also, I think, in passing legislation they know will either be vetoed or bottled up in the Senate, and basically conveying the message, if you want change in Washington, you got to get rid of these people. You got to get a Republican in the White House, and you got to get a Republican in the Senate. And now a Republican candidate needs to do that. And President Obama's opening on Do-Nothing Congress gives them a perfect chance.
Well, it may be the case that Harry Reid is the new target, that Nancy Pelosi is why she's not the House Speaker. But you do hear people talking in Washington. There are rumbles of the idea that Nancy Pelosi thinks she might become House Speaker again. And the head of some of their campaign committees are saying they are going to beat Republican House members to death with Medicare, that you're trying to change Medicare, we're protecting Medicare.
And that's why I think it's important for a Republican candidate to back the House Republicans on this, to have a message that we have a different message from business as usual. The House Republicans can only go so far. The real bully pulpit is for the Republican presidential nominee, whoever that is. Look, they're in a good position. Rick Santorum was in the Senate. Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House. They know how the Senate works. I think especially for Mr. Romney, who says he's an outsider in a business, he has to make clear he knows, being president isn't like being a CEO. These guys don't fall in line.
Yeah, and I think it's underappreciated sometimes. We focus so much on the presidential election and these primaries, but the performance in the House and the Senate for the Republicans is going to be crucially important to a Republican president.
Nominees, so forth, everything, especially
getting your agenda through.
Getting your agenda through, I mean, especially the Senate, for those reasons. You don't always have to have an absolute majority if you can get some Democrats over with you. But I think they have to make Senator Reid an issue. He's the one stopping a lot of the reforms that we want, and they have to put that question to the American people. Do you really want these reforms or not? And Republicans can't shy away from it.
Yeah, in some ways it's an issue of turnout. I mean, you have a lot of Republicans saying they're dispirited about the presidential nominee. Republicans have to vote if they're going to attain the numbers in the Senate that they're hoping for.
And it's as you sort of suggest, it's a whole ethos that they're fighting against. Business as usual in the Senate, the way spending is done, the lack of accountability, the back doors, the appointing people with the recess authority when the Senate's not in recess. All these things that I think the American people understand.
Okay, thanks so much, Bill.